it's not fear, but it is fear, right? Of the
That's fair.
space of
Yeah.
where like we don't know what's coming next, and
Mm-hmm.
just continue how we can from a status quo perspective of making it about our people and making
Yeah.
sure our people feel seen and safe. That is
Mm-hmm.
a monumental task in some instances. We're real clear now on who was being performative. We're real freaking clear, right? And so I think that can be a challenge for those individuals. I would say I feel fortunate in the culture of our company in that we're more concerned of like how are we messaging in a way to stay compliant versus changing who we are because it was never performative.
All right, y'all. Welcome. The time has come. Season 2, first episode. Hey, I've got
Oh, really?
I
The first one. I'm so
you are the
excited.
first of season 2. I'm honored in that regard because this is a titan, y'all. Like this is when we talk about like bold, big audacious
Gosh, like what is
views and right and the voice of employer brand um that doesn't just talk all of the cool, trendy things, but like she says the quiet parts out loud, and that's why I love her. I am honored to have the one and only Summer Baruth on Employer Branding Unfiltered. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. That was such a Can you like follow me around places when people are like, "What do you do?"
Not
I'm
at
like,
all. Just
uh,
talk to this gentleman.
talk to
He'll
this
tell you
man. He's
everything.
my agent. Yeah,
Yes.
all right, man. Thank you for
Look, and it's
having me.
all
I'm so
real.
excited. I didn't realize I was the first guest of season two because I couldn't get my crap together last year, so or for last season. So I'm like
You
very
know
excited
what? That tells me that the universe said, no, wait for like
for
the
time
shifting
such
landscape and
as this.
chaos before you bring summer in, because then it'll be a really good
Wait for a
episode.
time such as this to have her on to talk about all the things.
That's it. That's it. So we have got enough, I think, to fuel our conversation for several weeks if we were to do that. But look, so you have been a lot of places, but you are currently
Hmm.
at uh, TIAA, formerly TIAA CREF, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Look at you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I was
So
gonna be like, oh, you're at
Roger
Crest, and I'm like, I don't know what that is.
Roger Ferguson, former CEO.
Former CEO, now
Yeah,
Tashonda
yeah,
Brown
yeah.
Beckett.
Yeah, one of the few black CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, and his successor, the incomparable Tashonda,
We love tea.
who who's amazing. So look, your role is one that title wise I haven't seen much in our space, and I want
Yeah.
you to share a little bit about the title of the role, but also the work you do for the people who don't know you because they've been living under rocks.
Oh, lovely. Okay, great. Summer Baruth, right? Thank you for that lovely introduction. So right now, my title with TIAA is Enterprise Brand Strategy, so Director of Enterprise Brand Strategy. We're evolving it a bit even as we speak to be more of enterprise brand advocacy and engagement because I feel like that's a better incorporation of this role. And I think we'll dig into that today a little bit, right around what happens when this type of work sits in talent acquisition or HR versus when it sits in enterprise brand strategy or brand. I've been all around the world, so to speak, when it comes to employer brand. I've sat in all kinds of departments, some that made zero sense, but got the work done, and that's all you really wanted to do. And I think this is the best combination of when you can sit in that brand space and be a part of what's being created and have a seat at the table in the right way and how you can then be more consultative to the other departments because we know there's so many spokes to this work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to own it, but no one really wants to own it. Right? So I think it's that. So, yeah, so I'm really loving where it sits in this particular company at a time like this, during a brand transformation, during transformation as a whole with a company led by the incomparable Tashunda. So,
Yes,
um,
yes.
there's really
Look,
a vision, not just with her, but with her leadership team. on just getting out there and doing the work. And it just makes things so nice.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Look, we've got a lot to dig into off that alone. So I'm going to write down a few things to come back to on that one. But before I do, and maybe I'm just wrecking the flow and the energy here, but I gotta know, when did you first fall in love with employer branding?
Okay, so this is a good one. So I was like a little baby corporate person, and I say that I was like 30 something years old, so like really wasn't a baby corporate
It's
person.
like 2 years ago. Gotcha.
Yeah, like
Okay.
2 years ago, it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I actually had to tell somebody the other day that I was like, "Oh, I've been doing this for 24 years," and I about had a moment like, "Oh, oh." So I started out in our inclusion team and learning and development and developing engagement programs with our BRGs at Compass Group North America. And our chief people officer was like, "Hey, we." I was wanting to leave the company. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
that's the funny part. I'm like, this is not the team for me. You guys are not like I think I'm like 10 years ahead of where you really want to be. Because every time I would say something, it was like, not yet, not yet, not yet. And I'm like, it's so obvious. Um, so I was really ready to leave the company, had a conversation with him. He was like, look, we've got to hire this. And it was like, I don't know, 250,000 people over a course of time to keep up with what we needed from a growth perspective. He's like, I've really been looking at this like social media recruiting thing. Because remember, that's what we called it for a period of time.
That's
We got
exactly
our
what it was.
EVP nailed down. It's careers for life. I'm like, that sounds like a jail sentence, like careers for life. Like, I don't know.
Is this a gang we're joining? Like this?
Yeah, I know. I feel very like I don't know what's happening. But
Right.
I had a radio background. So in his mind, he was like, "Well, you did radio. Social media can't be that hard for you, right?" So it was like this vision that he had. I didn't know anything around employer brand. I was following a couple of people like on Twitter and like starting to see about it kind of popping up as I was trying to push people to think outside the box, even in just my little corner of the world in HR at the time. Um, so I was like, yeah, I don't think it's social media recruiting. I don't think that's what you're asking me to do, actually. But sure, let's start there if that's what makes you feel better, right? And I think a year into that role where he really was like, go meet with the agency that we hired. I'm not really sure they know what they're talking about. You know the lifeblood of the company. You can put it all together and make it make sense. And I was like, well, that's a vote of confidence. Thank you. And when I started to really dig into the research of how I was going to sell this idea of this work beyond the social media recruiting piece and what it actually meant as really a heartbeat of the company, and especially a company with like Compass Group where it's like at the time was like 30 something additional companies, so very much a parent company with 30 different companies. So everyone was going to have their own EVP, everyone was going to have their own approach for employer brand strategy. So it was like, where do we begin? And I think that's what I really learned about myself, that like I can take this very complex notion and put it into practice. And like how do you really make it make sense for such a globally, would then kind of start to spin out into like the global side of Compass Group, but like in a matrix organization such as that, and how do you make it make sense? And so it's probably a year into that I like really fell in love with it, because I started to see it as this puzzle, and really taking my comms and radio background, my mass media background, digital marketing, all the stuff I loved about HR on the people and culture side, and it kind of all fell into this one thing.
Mm.
The challenge part of it was like, I guess I also am just a glutton for punishment, because I was like, every day was getting beat up by the executive team, and you have to have a voice that's strong enough to understand that there's some change management, but also to kind of massage those relationships and nurture those relationships with key stakeholders at the very senior level, even when there's a huge gap, because that's the only way you're going to get anybody to listen, right? And so I think
Hmm.
I really was able to hone those skill sets in that time of kind of like, I don't know, I used to position it like when people ask me about this type of work, I'm like, be ready to go to battle like every day, because for a period of time until you get into a company that just like believes it, you're battling every
Constantly.
day. Like you're proving value every day, proving value every day. And so I think there's a bit of that I love too. But
Hmm.
it's nice to be 20 years on this side of it and approaching it differently. So I still love
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
What a backstory. What a love story, right?
A love story of employer
Eh,
brand. Did I start
eh,
out that? The number one question is, did you go to school for that? Well,
Hell
no.
no. There is no school for this. School of Hard Knocks. That's the
Yeah,
school
I'm
for
a
this,
psych,
right?
double major in psych and comm. So, I mean, I guess kind of, yeah, I went to school for it.
And that's a valid point because we've asked other guests the same question, and what you find consistently, just like your story, is that there is no curriculum for this work, right? Like this is we have tangible skills that are applicable, or that transition us into this work, but a lot of it is figuring this out on your own, relying on your network and community and so forth. But for folks like us who got into this before it was in vogue, right? Like it's you're blazing your own trail and making your own maps, as it
I
were.
remember they'd be like, "What do we call you? What's your role?" I'm
What
like,
is your title?
social media recruiter. I can promise you that. Like, that's not what this is. And so, it's like I feel like
No.
it's interesting to be on this side and like in this space that I'm in now, where like we need to kind of evolve the name of the role to differentiate you between work that other people in the organization are doing, right? Like that's more of a practice of that, which is nice,
Ooh. Yep.
versus many roles at many companies over many years. It's been like, well, we don't really like calling it employer brand here. So like what can we call it instead? Or like, like
Mm-hmm.
the
Oh,
operations. I'm like, no, we're really not. Like that's not what this is, right? And so
right.
developing a role over in a way of trying to prove value versus I've proven the value and now I need to differentiate myself in an organization is very
Mm-hmm.
different, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that because it also showcases that as we evolve in this work, and we get more seasoned in what we do, that our scope broadens as well, right? We're not just focused on TA; we're looking at the entire organization, as we should anyway. But strategically, we're thinking about all of the levers that brand touches, and the stakeholders and the leadership and the politics. And when you go through a few of these builds, you start to understand like this is so much more than like social media content, right? Like this is way more than just storytelling. This is like Washington D.C. level bureaucracy and
It feels like
politics
it
and
at times, right? It really does. Like my husband would be like, "Why are you so tired?" Like I'm like, I can't even explain it. I can't even because some of the meetings where you're like, "Oh, I thought you were my phone a friend. Now you're my phone an enemy." Got it. Check. Like,
now I
yeah,
hate you. Okay, I thought we were
okay.
cool.
Yeah. Oh, now I might be impeding on your budget. Got it. So now we like so it's always a
Yeah,
what is it
yeah.
like 10 steps forward, 5 steps
Five
back.
steps back, always, always. So okay. So you got your start in the hospitality. I guess that's
Yeah,
hospitality
it's
industry,
hospitality.
right? So then you built the thing, launched the thing, maintained and optimized the thing, and then you went somewhere else to do it all over again. Where'd you go next? Same
Sin
industry, different industry.
different industry, Centene Healthcare.
That's
Yeah.
right. Completely different. I knew the answer to that, by the way.
Completely
Yes.
different.
Yes. Tell me about that. So now you're
Yeah.
going from sort of 30 brands under one umbrella
Yeah.
to, in hospitality to a healthcare organization.
In the pandemic year, literally
Why not? Add
5 or 6 months.
that.
Yeah.
Add that degree of difficulty. So,
Add that to it. So I think
so
it was a
t-
little bit of this, much of the same, right? Because what I was taught, we had a team that was already stood up, right? Like there was already belief in employer brand, so it was less of having to go in and create things in that way. It was more optimizing what was in place and thinking of new go-to-market strategies. Um, One thing that was great about going to Centene was a budget for agency, which I had not experienced before. Because when you're building something brand new for a large matrix organization, yeah, there's money, but you need to prove a lot of stuff first before you get that money. And why would you need agency? We've got all of this here, Um, so it was a very good learning experience for me, even though I was there a short time. Some of
yeah.
that was just circumstantial, right? Like there was lots of stuff going on, and there was new opportunities coming my way as people were coming out of the pandemic, and I'm like, I think I'll go over here and try something else. But the thing that was great about Centene was that again, it was already stood up. There was plans in place, which can be good and bad because then you're kind of stepping into something that, listen, you got to believe in the work, and you got to believe in like what the strategy's in place and what's the mission of the company. And I felt like, yes, that was in place, but I probably do better, and what I learned about myself when I'm able to be a part of creating that, and not coming in and just having to do like, well, this is what our agency said we are, and we got to stick with this because that's what we have budget for the next X amount of years. And you're like, no, but that's not really what the feel is right now. I can't do it.
That's right.
Like you have to, because if you don't love it, you can't be there, right? Like that, doing this work, because how do you do this work and be the hype person for the company in that regard, and like, finding all those different things if you don't. And I found probably a year or so in that I didn't love it the way that I thought. And what I learned about myself was that I didn't build it. I could do it, but it felt very performative for me because it was like I was in a, John, you know me, I was in a box. I don't like being in a box. It was
Mm-hmm.
good,
Mm-hmm.
but it was good learnings for me, right? And I had a mentor of mine who had worked with me at Compass that was like, yeah, see, like you're gonna have to get around that boxing you in stuff because this is part of it. And I'm like, I don't know that I have to though. Like I really don't. I think there's a
Ooh.
way for me to learn from it, be boxed in, still push because I get hired for roles because I'm a disruptor, because I live out loud, because I'm bold and I push, because I challenge the status quo until you get me in the box because you've had enough. And and that's not what you hired me for, and we know that's not what you hired me for. So it's like, and I got really good at the optics and politics and change management piece, right? So I'm not like attitude in your face about it. I bring you on the journey with me. But if you keep telling me you love it, but you keep putting me in this box and saying not yet, I'm gonna figure out something that is yet for now, right?
Look,
But I think
look.
it was a very
Preach.
difficult time of trying to like hire healthcare into industry where people didn't want to be in healthcare. They were burnt out. Like there was a lot of things, but it was good learnings for me over the course of time to know what I want, what I don't want, what I want to build in a team, what I don't want to have in a team. There's a lot of that. So and it's a great team, and the leadership team there is great. I still love seeing all the things come out of it. I'm like, that's great. It just wasn't for me anymore, which is fine. And
Yeah.
I think, from there I went on to AECOM infrastructure, which is again another globally matrixed organization. And I would say even with Centene, while just one brand, they really also are matrix too because each state has its own set of health plans underneath it that are all branded. So it's kind of the same of what I come from, and that lots of different brands underneath one parent EVP, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. House of
and
Brands. Sure.
and so very much the same going into ACOM, where the challenge there was, um, like we needed to put a strategy in place. We need to figure out how do we localize it across different countries, regions, cultures. I loved, 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 loved that role.
Yeah.
Um, TIA was just great timing for me to like go work for an amazing leader that I really respected outside of industry and just as a person and a human, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
really the draw for me. Plus, it's not too shabby that the office is literally like 20 minutes up the road from my house.
I mean, that's a perk. That is a
And I was
perk.
I was like kind of starved for that like in-office interaction to be able to like live and feel the culture and brand a little bit.
Oh
It's
my
different when you're
gosh.
living remotely. So the global role with ACOM I loved because able to really help build a strategy. I was there as a consultant first. Then I said that I swiped right and stayed, because I was seeing as a consultant the good, the bad, the not so great, where the gaps are, what were the challenges, but also seeing where I could provide impact and knowing, who's going to do the work once, my project was over. And we just started having real conversation about, did I want to stay? Did I want to build it? Did I, all these things. So, and it was great. I loved probably the most there was that it kind of took me back to those roots of like the diversity and inclusion work at a global level, right? Like we're
Hmm.
we know what we're looking at in the US. It's very different in every other country of the world what we're looking at from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And so um, it's a good muscle to flex to have to think through how does our culture and our big brand play into our little brand EB, right? Um, and then how does that localize in very, very different cultures? So there was a lot of great conversations on the phone at all hours of the day for me, which I was thriving off of it, right? Like, in Australia, like what's going to play there, in Canada, what's going to play there, in India, what's playing there. Like I remember as a consultant very early on having a conversation still in lockdown. And it was at the time when India was seeing an increase again and having a conversation about trying to get people to come back to the office. And one of the TA guys was like, Summer, listen, like, all due respect to you, very polite to a woman and female. He's like, but with all due respect, like, we have people worried about if they come to work, they're going to die. So that's the reality. And
Mm.
it seems like, oh my God, but oh my God. It like level set the whole damn thing for me. I was like,
Yeah, it's like life or death now, for real.
thank you. I will quit trying to check the box just because that's what we think is happening and what we need here. And it just reminds you of like the worldly view that you have to have and like that cultural intelligence to really
Mm.
play things out. So I think that was the greatest 3 years spent for me being in that, or 3-ish years spent in that role of really, some with like, equally the frustrations of politics and the optics that come with the global role, but like the learnings were invaluable because you're getting to work with the diversity inclusion teams in all these different regions of the world and what's important to them and what's the focus for them, as well as how do we then articulate that as part of our employer brand to try to not just attract but retain. And I think that is the biggest miss for so many companies because they only see this work as hiring focused.
Ah, oh, talent attraction
Because
only.
that's what the ROI is that you can see immediately. And I hear
Mm,
you,
allegedly.
allegedly.
So before we go down that rabbit hole, because yes, that is one that needs to be discussed big time. I want to call out a couple of things that I think are gems that you've already dropped. One, that oftentimes employer brand leaders are hired because they're disruptors, right? And you and I have both dealt with this in different industries, similar industries, but large companies. And by and large, companies don't know how to deal with employer brand
Yeah.
leaders, right? Because we don't sit neatly in the TA org. We're not recruiters. We're not HR, business partners. We're not comms or marketing. We're kind of like all of those things, but yet none of those things. And so, usually when you come in and you get that first year out the way, you're still shiny, you're doing your road shows, everybody's loving the ideas, awesome, break things, run fast. We love it. And then that first performance review kicks in. Like, I don't even know how to
And
evaluate
you're
your
like,
job.
wait, what happened? I thought you loved me.
Right. And then it just sort of gets weird.
Yeah.
Right. And then, right. And the beauty is that we have the autonomy and I'd say the access to everybody in the organization. The challenge is that even with that access, right, can lead to some perceptions, some perspectives, some jealousy, even that you're getting meetings and taking time, but it's all within the purview of your role. Problem is, most people don't know what the role is, what it's supposed to do, what it entails, what's necessary to support it, and all that. So I love that you said, sort of being found in a box, right, or being found in a box, trying to be put in a box, and that you didn't accept it. And so it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes in life by Caroline Wanga, who is the CEO of Essence Magazine, formerly Chief Diversity Officer at Target. She said in a speech once, if who you are doesn't fit where you are, change where you are, not who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you lived that. You certainly went and found the space where your skill set, approach, and perspectives were elevated and supported. And so, really, really dope gem there. I couldn't let the audience miss that. The second thing is cultural intelligence, which I think brings us to a really interesting point right now, because we are in a space where the hiring or recruitment practices are under a magnifying glass of legality or perception of legality,
Right.
based on some very, what's the word? Controversial executive orders that have been put out in the past month.
Yeah.
And it's only been a month, y'all. That being said, we've got a lot of people in our industry trying to figure out, how do I brand an organization now to attract talent, especially talent that reflects the communities that are, that our company serves, and do so in a way that still reflects the culture that we actually have, regardless of this executive order. But how do we do so now in a way where we're still remaining culturally intelligent, but also in compliance? So I would love your perspective as you're in this.
Mhm.
Um, how are you seeing this navigated?
So I think right now there's a little bit of a standstill that's happening with not just with TIA. Like I can speak for lots of other companies that I'm seeing this at, right? Where everyone's like, I'm not really sure how much we're able to say, what we're allowed to say. So I think from a legal team perspective, which I do know this for TIA, like we're still in that space of like legal telling us like, let us like figure this all out really quick and like let you know. I will say that for us, we're in the middle of a lot of foundational work that we can't stop on, and the work that I'm like working with talent attraction on and things of like how they're going to market. A lot of that messaging was around the cultural pieces and how we talk about diversity and inclusion. And so we're having to really rethink that. Like, how do we now showcase it in a way that we're still giving you the heart of who we are without necessarily the words? So we're fortunate enough that we have a really great library that our employer brand strategy team, prior to me joining, but then I've been a part of this work, is we have our Faces of TIA series, which is very much the voice of our people, right? Like it is different stories that make up lots of different people in our organization from all different walks of life. And that's really my strategy at this point of how we move through it, is that, okay, we can't say that right now. So let's make this very much about our people. Like, let's just showcase our people in a way that, we're staying compliant to what we need to, because we are a financial services organization. We have lots of ties in lots of places, that
Mm-hmm.
we have to be really considerate of what we're doing. But I think we don't want to lose who we are at the core, which is we are reflective of the communities that we serve. And so we want to make sure that we are honoring that. And so that's been a lot of my conversations lately, is like, oh, are we still going to go forward with that campaign? Yep, I'm just going to change some of the words. Like,
Right.
the video
Right.
stands true, the words are going to change a little bit, right? And so I think it's that. And I think that's really, if we can push back past the hurt, the anger, the feeling of, I won't, it's not fear, but it is fear, right? Of the
That's fair.
space of
Yeah.
where like we don't know what's coming next, and
Mm-hmm.
just continue how we can from a status quo perspective of making it about our people and making
Yeah.
sure our people feel seen and safe. That is
Mm-hmm.
a monumental task in some instances for certain companies, especially the ones that have come forward real clear. Like, we're real clear now on who was being performative. We're real freaking clear, right? And so I think that can be a challenge for those individuals. I would say I feel fortunate in the culture of our company in that we're more concerned of like how are we messaging in a way to stay compliant versus changing who we are, because it was never performative.
That's strong. So really standing 10 toes down on your values
Yeah. And that and
is what it
and
sounds
those
like.
don't change, right? Because the values are who we are and they don't change. I mean,
They shouldn't.
they do change for some companies, but for ours in
I was
particular,
about to say they shouldn't, but we
they
do
are
see
they
that.
should be changing, but they are changing for some
Yeah,
companies. And it's very real. Um, but I think,
absolutely.
having the leadership of Deshunda and a very diverse leadership team that covers all perspectives, I think, while we're not boldly coming out with any messaging at this point in time, again, only a couple of weeks in on this, of like still trying to figure things out. She's been very clear in our town halls of like, we are who we are, and that does not change, right? And I think that's exactly what our employees need to hear, and it comes true. And she's very active on social media, both personally and professionally, and she's made it, I think, without coming really boldly out and saying it, she's made it very clear where she stands.
Which is absolutely necessary. And I think that's the point that a lot that's getting missed and lost along the way is the employees are going to look to leadership to know what's safe.
Yeah.
Like what are we empowered to do? What is our point of view? What is
Hmm.
our stance? Where do I fit into this? Right? Because
Yeah.
there's people from communities that are directly impacted by some of the policies outside of DEI,
Yeah.
who are afraid. Right? And so, you know, I think that there's also a bigger question right now about what is the employer brand's employer brand leaders as well as the employer brand itself? What is the role in creating that sense of safety, but also the
Mhm.
support, right? How are we embracing our employees through the brand work to make sure that they know not only what's going on, but what their role is in this? What are you
Yeah.
seeing?
I think I think some companies are getting it really wrong really quickly because they weren't ahead of it. And I think other companies saw it coming and were way ahead of it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that those that this is embedded in your culture. So if I look at even like TIA, for example, right? Like it's just who we are as part of the culture. We work with higher ed institutions though. So a lot of this was coming down the pipeline last year, year before last, depending on what states we're sitting in, right? So you kind of already have a vision of, okay, regardless of who goes into, to office here, like there's some challenges already popping up and we need to think about how we're approaching it. And we have a
Mm-hmm.
great team that focuses on that. I think a good indicator for me of where we are as a company is like the biggest thing that we're concerned about is just making sure from legal that we're like not pushing too hard, right? Like, so for me, it's like it's not like changing of all these policies. It's more like just how we're talking about it. And I think
Sure.
that comes true in like how we're communicating with our employees. And I think from an employer brand perspective at any company, it does fall on these teams and this work to help with internal messaging, to be consultative where you can with the teams that are stewarding the work, whether they want to hear it or not. But I think it's really leaning into what are your employees saying externally on review sites? What are they out there like talking about on social media? Like what sentiment information do you have? And maybe approach it that way, and how you're helping to message internally as well as what are you saying externally, because nothing worse,
Mm-hmm.
as we know, to be putting one type of brand out in the world but living a different one inside.
Oh boy.
And
Yes.
I think I know that over the years we've both seen a lot of that, and I think that unfortunately we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing a lot of that right now where it's very clear in how the executive leadership is positioning themselves outside of where they think people aren't watching. And it's just hilarious to me that why would you not think that people aren't watching right now more than ever? And I think it's just like standing true to like you don't need to be canceling programming that you already have in place. Like Black History Month is still a thing. Like we should be doing, like how are you still messaging
Legit.
that kind of your stat? Like what is your status quo? Like your tentpole moments that you already do for your employees. Like how is
Yeah.
that showing up? And I think that's with any company. And unfortunately, I think that not a lot of companies are equipped. And I unfortunately feel like a lot of employer brand teams are
Mm-hmm.
new-ish or are not positioned well in their companies to be able to have a voice, so they don't feel like they can push back.
Yeah. I think it's more well, I think both equally. I'm not going to say that it's the latter more so because I think there are look, there's always going to be folks who would err on the side of caution,
Hmm.
and legal will certainly do that. They'll err on the side of
Yeah.
the least risk, right? Perceived or real. But I think there's also something to be said about where employer brand sits and what impact our voice or what power or authority our voice carries within the organizations we're doing this work at. So I don't know. I have yet to see, let me just say, I'm sure there may be something out there where employer brand has an equal voice with corporate brand.
Hmm.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Not to say it doesn't exist. Maybe it does. I would love to know if it does, but I haven't seen it yet, and I've seen a lot. And I understand the why, right? The essential is the perception that EB doesn't generate revenue, so corporate brand has a direct impact on Wall Street, and shareholder value and revenue in some cases, right? And I get that. But when it comes to the pulse and the energy and the culture of your company through the lens of the people, I think that should have a seat at the table. Maybe that's represented by chief people officers and so forth, but not necessarily through the lens of brand, right? It's usually through the lens of compliance or policy. And
Hmm.
And so I don't know what that looks like. I don't want to overinflate our importance, but I also
Right.
think that there's something, right? We have something to offer to that conversation that I think oftentimes adds a lens that people don't look through,
Hmm.
you
I
know?
would agree. And I think that it starts to lean into that whole conversation of where does this work sit, right? And so I think
Yes.
often
Yes.
I find that in HR, it is only about, like we said earlier, the attraction piece. And so when you try to have a voice in many companies, it's like, okay, well, just we're not hiring right now. So, like, why are you worried about it? And you're like,
That's not what this is
no.
for. Yeah.
We are actually always should be worried, even more so when we're not hiring, right? Um, versus it's sitting in brand. So like on our team, we're enterprise brand. We sit with the chief brand officer, chief marketing officer, like right, like we're right there in those conversations. And it's been a learning curve for me on this side, even though at AECOM I sat in brand as well, but just to have this type of access as we were talking about earlier. And
Hmm.
really like people saying, well, what do you think? Not that I
That's
haven't had it
different.
said that way, but like because I did have those experiences and I was experiencing in that way because I was building at all these other companies. In this
Hmm.
case, like it's built, I'm just changing kind of how we think about it. Um, what in working with our employer brand strategy team, I've kind of set myself a little bit apart, still working on employer branding, but across how we show up across all of the facets, right? So it's a little bit different. And to be asked like, well, if you think there's value in this, then we should do it versus well it doesn't matter like I'm going to ask you what you think but I'm checking the box because I had to ask you kind of thing like it's different and I think it helps us in moments like these where we're all pulling up together in all these different work streams where we've got representation from comms marketing brand DE&I like let's have a real conversation about how we want to show up moving forward for Heritage Month and internally what do we want to be messaging and we're having like real conversation where we're like yeah it totally aligns to our brand it totally aligns on where we're going it's totally aligning to like the work that we want our clients seeing us doing like it and that makes me very hopeful about this work at this particular company in this moment in time right because it's like for me I am getting that voice in a way to your point you normally don't have because it's not seen as a value to the bottom line. I think
Hmm.
because there's so much visibility on the people element in this whole space of how we are right now, right? I think it's lending itself to really be there if you have leaders in place that believe in it, which we do. And so I feel fortunate in that.
Well, I think that's the defining factor, right? And I wanted to ask, two things. One, how did you find yourself in this unicorn position of not sitting in TA,
Hmm.
not sitting on comms per se, but you're under the broader
Brand.
marketing and brand organization. Did they bring you into that, or did you have some help in shaping that?
So I was hired in to work as part of the employer brand strategy team, which sits on
Sits
brand.
under,
So
sits on.
um,
Okay.
it
Oh,
had been
okay.
brought over from HR in
Uh
previous
huh.
years prior to me coming in. I don't know the reasoning
Nice.
behind why it was brought over, other than the fact of, as it happens in many companies. Because remember earlier I said, even though I've sat in lots of
Mm-hmm.
focus group, when we were trying to figure out where it all sat. Like I went from chief people office, chief growth officer, back to comms, back to reputation management. I mean, ping ponged around a bit, and I think it
Got it.
happens in a lot of companies. And so I think, but this work had been moved employer brand strategy to work alongside HR but separate from HR. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think really what has happened is just if you look at my background, it's a little all over, but it was all leading toward it was always around this work, at least for the past, 20 something years, right? But it was a lot of variables and a lot of side projects, chief of staff, executive assistant, like all different kinds of things of wherever they need to put me in a budget line, get the work
Yep.
done, but get the money approved, right? It was kind of like,
Sure.
but a lot of it's been around this work. And so when you sit down and start having conversations, which were a very transparent, authentic organization, and I started saying, well, yeah, like I can do a lot of the stuff that you hired me for. That's what you hired me for. But I also can do this and this and this and this. And that led to kind of this unicorn type situation where it was like, oh, you do have this experience of sitting in HR plus this background of, working in the chief people office in lots of different roles, like, so it's just kind of the experience that I brought with me in a time that's needed where we're trying to break down silos in both
Sure.
the marketing and comms as well as in HR. And having that background, it just lends itself to it almost naturally. It honestly, I didn't go looking for it. I would have been like, yeah, let's just keep doing it the way that you hired me. But it was really in conversations of just getting to know the leaders, and they're like, tell me about yourself. And I'm like, "Blah, blah, 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 blah," and they're like, wait, what? Wait, go back to that. You did what? Can we talk?
Yeah.
Like, it was more
You
of
do
that.
all that?
I didn't know you've done that before. Did you know that we need that over here? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've been kind of poking around, it's
Yeah.
more that. It's more just me being that speaking things out loud of being like, I was curious as to when I came to the organization, like, why are we doing these things? And they're like, oh, we've been wanting to fix that. Or,
Mm-hmm.
do you
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to do that? Do you understand like how to guide that? Because we don't have that right now. Like, it's more being bold to speak up on what you do know, and then figuring out a way to be like, yeah, I could do that. Fine, sure.
And I want to stay on that point because it's so important. I think a lot of times we as employer brand leaders don't maximize the moments of how much face time we get with people who have a lot of authority in our organizations, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's C-suiters or whomever.
Yep.
And if we don't offer that perspective, that expertise, rather than just being happy to be in the room, right? Then you're
Yeah.
missing huge opportunities, not just for the work you're doing, but also perspective around the organization. Where could this brand work be useful, or your skill set be useful in other ways that most leaders aren't even thinking about when they think about employer brand?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important point you bring up. Secondly, since you've sat in different organizations within the companies with this work, how do you find where you sit now, right? Being under the umbrella or the big tent of brand
Hmm.
versus being in the HR organizations.
Yeah. I think it gives you a broader perspective. And
Mm,
so, meaning when you're in when you're embedded in and being paid for, and you are bound to your head count that for you and your team in HR, everything's everything is reactive, right?
that's right.
So
Yeah,
like
it's limited resources. I mean,
limited
full
resources.
stop.
Full stop, right? But not just that, it's that whatever's important right now is important right now, and the hiring needs could change tomorrow, and they're like, yeah, don't worry about that anymore. So your priorities are consistently shifting, 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 shifting. And so it feels like you're always just whack-a-moling all the time. And you're trying to push towards strategy, and you're trying to push towards being proactive, and everybody's like, yeah, yeah, we know we need to do that. Yeah, yeah, but you're always building the plane as you're flying it. And that's been my experiences in most organizations when it's sat in talent attraction, or been paid for by talent attraction,
Hmm.
where like, well, we pay for you, so like you're at our beck and call kind of feel, right? Or you're on our team, therefore we own your time. Versus when you sit on brand, and you truly sit on brand, where you're a headcount of brand, you've built your team on brand, and your leadership is brand and marketing, or however that falls. You're now really operating as a consultant with your internal client, being HR. And that allows a very different scope, right? Because I have a very different view sitting in brand, or even when I sat in the chief growth officer organization at Compass Group, that was also a very different perspective because I was able to see everything holistically. So I think when you can sit outside of TA and HR, but you're assisting them in their work, it it just is better. Your work is just better because you're not down in the day-to-day tactical stuff. You're doing that, but you're doing it in a way that feels much more efficient, much more broad brush to the entire organization, because then I can clearly see it as an example, like, oh, I'm going to help provide information to our business development team that's going to help them understand people and culture. But that's all stuff that I can recreate and use over here for a campaign in 6 months when we have a hiring need in that space. Like, I can just think about things, and our teams can think about things in a much more holistic perspective, than when you're just like, I just need a campaign. I just need to talk about programmatic. I just need to be worried about this right now,
Right.
versus you're sitting over here and you're seeing like, oh, we've got an entire calendar of 18 months of things, and I can clearly see where I'm going to repurpose things Because every company has that issue, right? Where they're like everything needs to be net new every single time, and I'm the queen of repurpose. So I'm like, we do
I
not need to
love
do
it.
that. Like we just need to repurpose all the time spent for that social post or that article or whatever and reuse it. So
Sure,
I think
sure.
that's something you lose when you sit in HR because then you're knocking on doors and begging for
Mm.
content and for connectivity. Because I remember being on
Hmm.
that side, being like, "Well, I just need to talk to you. What do you need to talk to me about? Why? Well, we're
We're
not
not even
connected
hiring
yet.
right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we're not even hiring right now." Versus me, this in this way, I'm flowing the other way, where I have all the information, our team has all the information, and I'm looking at the gaps that I see and being like, "Hey, can I grab some time with you? I'd really love to give you some creative that would be really great to help your team because I'm not seeing it show up in the world." And
Yeah.
I just came through and followed the candid journey myself last year, and it's nowhere, right? Like it's like
Oh my
it gives you an
gosh.
opportunity to kind of point out gaps and opportunities, um,
Hmm.
and really fill it in. So that's the difference I see, and I wish more companies would move to it. As a practitioner, I think it's so much more beneficial to people in this space to sit on a brand side of the organization or comms and marketing because there's more room to grow. Because the number one thing that I'm asked over and over and over again is how do you continue to evolve in this work
Yep.
and continue to progress in your career without becoming a consultant, going to work for agency, like because let's be real, like right, let's be real. Like you're either going to go do that. Most companies are not going to make you, there's not going to be like a VP of employer brand. I mean, maybe in some cases, but in larger companies, but it's like you get to a
By and
certain
large.
point and it's a
Yeah.
ceiling, right? And
That's
so
facts. Yep.
I get that question a lot where people are like, well, what do I pivot to? And I think for me, that's probably the reason why my approach has been this way and where I've kind of kept up my learnings in people and culture work and AI evolution and all the things that interest me as a human, where I
Hmm.
see gaps in the world separate from what industry I'm in, while
That's
also
right.
looking for ways in the company that I'm in to kind of broaden, grow, like where can I stretch and take stretch assignments that make zero sense to anybody else. But if I have one leader that's like, sure, jump in and do it, dude, I'm jumping in and doing it because I want them to remember, I can figure anything out.
That's right. Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Exactly.
but I
Look,
think
oh
that's
my
how you
gosh.
kind of stakehold it because otherwise you pigeonhole into
I was just about to
employer brand
say.
has so many facets. Like you should be able to grow in lots of different ways, but you have to market yourself. You have to think about ways that you can market yourself.
100%. And I think that brings up the the Hatfields versus McCoy question of employer brand or recruitment marketing or versus recruitment marketing. And I think what you have just showcased beautifully for the audience here is that when you are in an HR or TA organization doing employer brand work, you will always be relegated to recruitment marketing
Yes.
versus the broader expanse of what this work from an employer brand perspective can offer you. Because to your point, TA pays for you. So
Yeah.
TA wants the maximum
Yeah.
productivity in direct relation to what they need done. And TA is a service provider to functions within the organization. So yes, you do have to hustle and get out there and see how can I help your organization hire hard to fill talent, all these things. But then it takes away from the broader brand aspect of it when you're trying to apply brand to recruitment marketing efforts, and it just muddies the water. So that
Yeah.
leads me to the all important question, Summer Baruth. What is the difference between employer brand and recruitment marketing? Please settle this for all.
Okay, thank you. Recruitment marketing is what everybody wants to bucket this into. So let's start there. What it is and what
Sure.
it isn't. What it is, what it isn't. What it is the way that you're going to market and all the creative and the social media and all the tactical items that you go to market with, right? So that is your localization of your employer brand. Your employer brand is actually how people feel working for you, working with you, how they feel like they're being seen, how they feel like they're showing up. And that employer brand strategy is then how will you employ those value systems, that mission, that purpose, and through recruitment marketing, but also through various other tactics internally throughout the organization as well. So I think, I see all kinds of ones all the time where it's like, it's the foundation here. This is how you go. I don't know. Like there's so many like little cliche ones that I hear all the time of like employer brand is this, recruitment marketing is this. But I really think the employer brand is like the foundational elements of how you feel working there. Different from your EVP, right? So your EVP is also foundational, but it's a little bit even more involved. But your employer brand itself is like, how does that show up? And so it's more than a tagline, just so we're clear. I would put the tagline underneath recruitment marketing, but me.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Preach,
but the
preach.
employer brand itself is how does it feel to work here? Like, what are those attributes that come into play? And then how
Hmm.
do you localize that? And so that's where the words, the creative, the visual vocabulary comes into play. That's recruitment marketing. Um,
Hmm. Love it.
it can be difficult, right? Because like you said, we want to put everything underneath this recruitment marketing branch. And then I get the question, every TA team has a recruitment marketer. Why doesn't recruitment marketing sit in marketing? Oh, also a great question. I don't know. Like, so it's it's always this whole space. But I really
Yeah.
look at people like, everyone wants to kind of put it into that funnel space. Great if you want to do that. But I really look at it as like the foundation piece is that employer brand and not what you're saying. It's
Hmm.
what you
Hmm.
actually do. So you'll hear me always say, like, show me, don't tell me. So what you show me is your employer brand, and what you tell me is your recruitment marketing.
I love it. I love that
Which I've been
description.
challenged on that before because they're like, well, that's kind of like you can show me through recruitment marketing. Yeah, you can, but
You
okay.
can, yeah, yeah, but it's so the way I like to say it is, recruitment marketing puts butts in seats.
That's
Employer
good.
brand tells butts what the seat is, feels, looks like,
And if they
right?
want to stay, right? Like
And if
that's.
they want to sit in it, right?
And I think that's like it's such a big thing for me. Like when I sit down with leaders in any industry or any roundtables I go to, I love to go to conferences and I go sit down with people. I'm always like, listen, here's the end of the day thing. Like if we can quit talking about employer brand about just being attraction focused. Again, I get that that's where it's easy to show value. It's easy to show return, but I can show you just as much value in return on how it affects retention and how my personal mission as a human in this world, and I learned this from my dad, is that like people want to feel seen and heard. And I
Mm-hmm.
want and hope that I leave every person I interact with that feeling that you were seen and heard, that I like did something that makes you feel good and that you like are a better person because we've spent the time together. Like that's what I hope for. But I also want people just to feel seen in their space because we're in a world where that doesn't happen often anymore, right? And I feel like that's where this work really truly can shine, and that if we can allow people, our own people that we already have hired, to feel seen and heard, the attraction part will take care of itself because they
Mm-hmm.
want to stay, they feel seen, they want to share with their friends how seen and heard that they feel and how they feel like they belong. Like that's what I want. And I feel like if we could all approach it that perspective, it makes the rest of it easier. I'm always like if people aren't leaving, then you're just hiring for growth and that's amazing. Wouldn't that be great? Like, like
and and look, I can't let the opportunity pass. If anyone has the opportunity to be at a conference with Summer, you're in for a treat. She's amazing to be at a
thank
conference for,
you.
especially small circle. Like if you can get into that circle, get in there and stay there,
We have fun.
and with full consent, get a hug. She's amazing energy.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. So I look, we're we could go for hours.
We did.
I want to take us to the point, I feel like there's so much more we didn't talk about, but
I,
that's what part two is for.
there you go.
I as we always do on Employee Branding Unfiltered, we have our guests answer a question that our former guests left for them, and in parting, leave a question for our next guest. So the question that was left for you, Summer, as an employer branding professional, what tool do you wish existed that doesn't?
Ooh. That one's kind of hard because I feel like there's so many good ones that are coming up.
You only get one. You only get
Okay.
one.
I think that for me, like for having a tool that would really help us look at, and somebody's going to tell me they already have it, that's fine. But maybe I just don't have knowledge of
That's
it,
fine. Hey.
is really taking that sentiment that we see from our employees and help us truly craft things in the right way. based on our purpose, mission. I feel like I've seen some variable of it in some other tools, but like never fully baked out. Along with like we could feed in like analytics to it and really help us see a broader picture of like where we're influencing different things across not just candidate journey but employee, but also wouldn't it be lovely if we could also figure out a way to get like what business return that we're offering with the work that we're doing as well. It's like
Oh, the
somebody's gonna come back to
ROI
me
of
like,
employer
Summer, I
brand.
got it. I already have it. And they probably do. I just missed you because I have way too much fun at the conferences walking around like seeing my people, and I probably didn't come to your booth. And it's fine. Like you can just ping
That's
me.
facts.
It's
Yeah.
fine.
You know what's funny? I think what you just described is the holy grail of employer branding,
Right.
and I think that's the right ask. If the genie was given one wish and you asked for that, I think that would be a wish well
Yeah.
spent. But yes, I love that question. So in that regard,
Yeah.
I'll do some research too to see if there's anyone we know who's doing that. But I think
I feel like I've
it's
seen
yet to be
pockets of
developed.
some of my
There's
friends.
pieces of it, right? But I don't think there's
They're like, "Oh, I know what you want."
yeah, we'll get there. So in parting then, what question would you like to leave for our next guest?
I think it would be, where do you see this work in employer brand evolving to? I want to leave it something like thoughtful with it, but I'm not really sure. Like I just was like, where do you see this work evolving to, especially in like when it comes to like the reskilling and AI? It's like something around there. Like that
Okay.
feels like it's very provocative right now. So it's like how do we continue to present ourselves from an employer brand like with heart in a time of AI? Maybe it's that.
Mm. So
We can
so
clean
if
that
I
up. I'll
I
think
was about to
about
say
it
if I may,
later.
if I'm hearing the spirit of of the question, um, h- could we say, and you, look, edit me on the fly, could how do we maintain the humanity in
Thank
employer
you.
branding
That's
with
what I
the
was going
advent of
for.
AI?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
does that work? All right. See,
Thank
look,
you,
teamwork.
John Graham, for helping me
Well,
articulate my words. You know what's
somebody
so
said
funny?
earlier.
Whenever somebody hands me a script and they're like, "We need you to read from this script," and I can't do it.
I'm
They
terrible
do.
with
I'm on
scripts.
the board at my university, and they like tomorrow I have to speak at an event, and they've already sent me the script, and I'm like, I can't do it, but
Throw that out.
I can just like do this all day long. So it's like you asked me, anyway, fine. Thank you
I,
for helping me.
that's the energy. Of course, of course. Look, somebody said on a call earlier, if there's one thing John Graham will do, it's find the words.
Love it.
So I appreciate you so much, Summer. Thank you for being an amazing thought leader in the space, a change agent, and advocate for the advocates. You are a beacon for those who are just getting in the space and professionals like myself who've been in it for years. I love to
Oh,
see what you do, and I appreciate your time, your wisdom, and your generosity. So thank
thank
you.
you, Don. I appreciate you.
Of course, of course.
That
We would
makes me
love to
like,
have you back.
I feel seen. Thank you for making me feel seen.
Of course, of course.